This is Mark Briggs, the Elite Dark Knight, teaching a chess game tonight. It's pretty rare that I do this, though I'm going to teach move by move the Queen's Gambit Decline Orthodox defense, though you might have seen this before. This is going to improve players at the game. I prefer to teach games that show strong moves with themselves, or moves that mean something every time. I'm not really into wacky puzzles or the funny light games. This video is for the serious chess player who wants to improve and who wants to learn from me. I'm doing this for fun and free, and hopefully you'll learn and enjoy something with this. And I will explain all the pertinent moves as I go along. So without much further explanation on the introduction, let's start the game. I am white, so you are viewing the game from my perspective, as played by me a while ago. I am a queen pawn player, which means I prefer positional play over tactical play. Yes, the game could be positional and tactical, and it generally is, but d4 tends to be a safer move than e4, in the sense that when you move the queen pawn 2 spaces, it is protected, unlike the king pawn that isn't when you move it. So the games tend to be more positional in nature. My opponent plays d5. I play c4, known as the Queen's Gambit. This is the actual opening, and not necessarily the movie or the show. So after c4, there are ways to refute the gambit, or to accept it. If black takes a pawn, it's called Queen's Gambit accepted. To refute it, or to sidestep it, you play Slav with c6, or the orthodox defense with e6. My opponent chooses e6. After e6, I play knight to c3, moving a knight first, knight before bishop. This is the main line. Knight to f6, moving a knight, controlling the center. And now I play bishop to g5 to pin the knight, and moving a new piece. So far, so good for both sides. Bishop to e7, break the pin. e3, to recapture the pawn if black captures my pawn with my bishop. Black can do an early castling because he's moved both his kingside pieces out while I still have to move mine. Black castles. Knight to f3, I'm moving a new piece. So far, no one has done anything wrong. Now here's the tricky part. Black should play knight to d7 or c6. He should move a new piece. But he plays knight to e4. Black wants to choose an early liquidation that favors white. Normally, I could stop here and say white is going to have the better game no matter what he does. But in the event that black plays this way, or you need to know how to win a one game, you can follow these lines. Bishop takes e7. I'm happy to trade here because I'm trading a relatively bad bishop for black's good bishop. I have a pawn on a center square, making the queen's bishop somewhat of a bad bishop. So queen takes bishop. After queen takes bishop, I play c takes d5. It's like I prefer to fix a pawn structure, and I believe that my lead in development will give me an advantage. Knight takes knight. B takes knight. E takes d5. c4 to contest this pawn, to trade. This pawn is a backwards pawn. I want to unbackwards it. I want to trade off this weak pawn for the strong center pawn. Queen to b4 check. You might think that black is strong here, that his queen is strong, but it's not. White, the queen generally does not attack by itself very well, as you can see, after queen to d2. Queen takes queen, check. King takes queen. Bishop to e6 to guard the pawn. It might have been better to take the pawn because now white can somewhat force exchange a knight for a bishop. After bishop to e6, knight to g5, threatening to take this. Now c6, he must guard the exchange. c takes d5. Now, if bishop takes d5, e4 comes, so he must take with the pawn. C takes d5. Now, realizing that a bishop is better than a knight, I will trade my knight for his bishop. Since the board is becoming more opened up as time progresses. Now, this is the master move here. You may want to take a second to pause the video and see what we would do here as white. Alright, so the move that might be hard to see for beginners or of non-expert strength is f4, cementing my lock on e5 and preventing the rook from taking f2. It also saves time. If I play king to e1 to guard this, I'm losing time. I like my king on d2. Knight to c6, black finally develops his last minor piece. And since the bishop is strong on its original square, I don't necessarily need to develop it right now. So but like anything in chess, whatever phase of the game you're in, it's always good to develop with a threat. And I do this with rook to b1, hitting this pawn. Now, so black can protect with his rook or his knight, but he simply plays b6. B6. And it's supported by this. But it allows bishop to b5. See, here I am. I'm developing again with an attack. I'm attacking the knight this time. So now he has the option to move the knight or protect with the rook, but then I can play bishop to a6 here. So he decides to move the knight. And at this point, black's game is surely going to crumble. It might not look so bad, but it really is. Rook bishop versus rook knight ending on a fairly open board. White pretty much has a one game, but he still has to be careful. And black is struggling for a draw, if there even is one. So rook h to c1. I've completed my development. And you might think this doesn't look familiar, but the rooks occupy the best possible files that they can, the b and the c file. So now, to prevent rook to c7, black moves his rook a c8 to challenge my rook. Unfortunately, there's almost like nothing that black can really do to prevent losing at this point, himself from losing. So, do you see a tactic here? What is something that white can do? You can pause the video for a second to figure that out. When you play chess, you want to create multiple threats at any phase of the game, and white has one. Bishop to d7, attacking the rook and the pawn. So now, rook takes c1. If you're a non-beginner, you may realize that you might want to recapture the rook right away, but the rook on c1 didn't check anyone. So can you guess what white's next move is? You may pause the video to figure that out. Pretty easy if you've been playing chess for a while, right? You just play rook takes e6 check. Because now black has to respond to the check. He cannot move any of his rooks, or at least the rook on c1. He can move the rook on f8, but that's not wise. So he simply plays king to h8. Now I can play rook. So just because you have a capture in a situation doesn't mean you have to take that capture. White had two captures, and either of them benefited one, but one of them won a pawn instantly without any punishment from black. After rook takes c1, there's almost nothing he can really do at this point. He simply plays knight to g6, giving up. I mean, if he tries to hold pawns and stuff, the rook bishop will surely beat the rook knight at this point anyway. So he just quickens the end. Bishop takes d5. But this is a good example of how to win a one game. After bishop to d5, rook to d8. It may be tempted to play e4 or something, but as long as the king is back here guarding the pawn chain, and white can put on two defenders here, black can never bust through. Black has no way in as long as white can defend everything. Or the defending side has adequate defenders. In this case, he does. After bishop to e4, attacking this. Knight to e7. Rook to c7, and white has invaded. Black is pretty much a lost game, and black should resign here, and pretty much does. So the knight the bishop is like completely cutting off this knight from going anywhere. He can go here or here, but there's nothing he can really do. So after a6 to save the pawn, probably from time pressure, he just drops the knight. Rook takes e7, and black resigns. So essentially, I did everything right. I played perfectly. There is no wrong errors in my movement. And after I've secured a winning position, I won a game by not being too impulsive or too brash. I took my time to methodically maneuver myself into a further win, to further advance my win. And that's it for now. If I have more chess games to teach or anything more insightful, I can post it later. Thanks. Have a good night.